She in naval chat rooms posting captain.
Avast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Left on Red. It's Nova, it's Riley, and after sort of alluding to this on previous episodes and having watched the film adaptation on Kill James Bond, we read Master and Commander, the first in the Aubery-Maturin series. And first of all, before we get into anything, the last time I talked about this, I got ratioed in the comments by people going, how the fuck did you pronounce that dude's surname? And for the record, I'm not insane. There are, like, I've only ever seen it written down, and there are, like, in Spanish it would be Maturin, in French it would be Maturin, but the author and the BBC adaptations pronounce it Maturin, so Aubery-Maturin.
Yeah, well, I think that makes sense, though, right? Because he's Irish Catalan, raised in Ireland, and then sort of somewhat in England.
Have the weirdest accent, you know?
Yeah.
And what might that sound like?
Well, who could get what? Hey, you know what you should do if you're listening to this? Try it on your own.
Yeah, in public, ideally. Yeah. If you're like on the tube or something listening to this, just break out an Irish accent, break out a Catalan accent, and kind of merge them together until you get a kind of like very early 19th century naval surgeon, you know?
No, but also, Nova, you have mispronounced another name, which is not Aubrey, it is autism. This is the autism book.
It's true. Autism is a developmental disorder characterized by knowing a lot about sailing ships, wanting to know more about sailing ships, seeking to explain sailing ships to others. And so, these are books that I really like. I loved the movie as well. And I'm coming back to them after like a long time away, which is this is my hedge against everything I get wrong, misremember, conflate, invent, is that it's been a long time hence. But we started over from the beginning. We read the first one in a series of about 20, because the whole thing is it's a roman fleuve. It's a long novel of 20 books, and we read the first one of them.
And I am sure, as time goes on, we will read the rest of them.
Yeah, we just like fuck off everything else, and we just do a year of non-stop Aubery-Maturin.
More naval stories, except for the ones on land, of which people often forget there are many.
Yeah, it's sort of like this is the thing. If you commit yourself to a sort of long story of like the society of the early 1800s, there's going to be a lot of it on boats, which is the thing you're most interested in. There's also going to be a lot of like drawing rooms involved. It turns out that often the things that happen in those drawing rooms are of far more like political consequence and import than the things with the sails and the cannon and so forth.
Well, yeah. This is. I think let's go back to the beginning, right? Let's just say you are one of the three people listening to this who has neither seen the movie nor read the books and doesn't know what we're talking about. Patrick O'Brian is considered widely to be one of the best historical novelists kind of ever.
Yeah, genuinely, like reading his prose is like slipping into a warm bath. It's genuine because very, very few people write like this, and everything has this kind of lyrical quality to it. And there's two things that I really want to draw out about Patrick O'Brian's writing in this. One is the sort of the turn of phrase, and the other, it's going to be difficult for me because I have like 500 notes because I've highlighted every single sentence that appeals to me.
You have highlighted Master and Commander in its entirety.
I'm going to be expensing like 6 packs of highlighters. I've used all of them. But the other thing is that he picks and chooses his scenes very carefully, and there is nothing in there which he does not want to depict and does not want to depict with this run of the sort of like very lyrical. And so there are quite a few scenes, like for instance, if you've seen Master and Commander, the film, you might remember that like a sort of like very important, very evocative piece of that shows you that Stephen Maturin is like a talented surgeon, is him replacing a guy, like a part of his like fractured skull on deck with like a piece of like melted coin. The book does not describe that. It just sort of glosses over, and you find out about it with like other recountings of it. And the same with like other bits of this. If it doesn't interest O'Brien, or if he's not like, if it's not something that he wants in that narrative, he is perfectly happy. Where I think a lot of more modern novelists would be frightened to do this, to be like, this scene happens, we're gonna move past it, and you're gonna find out about it later, and in a way that compels me.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I think as well changes throughout the sort of 20-book series, is that as he goes on, Patrick O'Brian, I think quite grudgingly, will say, okay, fine, I'll depict the thing that you care about.
Yeah, but I want to get back to my like battles.
Yeah, I want to get back to my battles, or I even want to get back to my painstaking description of like the Second Watch engaging in like practice to get its cannon firing quicker.
My favorite bit, and I've mentioned this before in this book, is Aubrey, who is in charge of newly in command of this sloop, the Sophie.
Oh, is it a sloop, or is it a brig with a quarterdeck rigged like a sloop?
For formal reasons, it is a sloop. But he's sort of like, he's husbanding this like allowance of gunpowder that he has in the hold, in the magazine, very, very carefully. And he's like, well, I've been issued this much and no more, but we should, at the very least, like fire off a couple of cannon to get them used to it. And then in the very sort of like deepest recesses of his soul, there's like a little voice that's like, and think of how good it's going to smell. And it's just, that's such a perfect piece of characterization of Aubrey as a commander. It's like somewhere deep within him is the kind of like, yeah, the gunfight smells really fucking good.
And so Master and Commander is very little actually like the movie of the same name.
Yes.
The book is the movie is an amalgamation of some vignettes from this book, then the ship from HMS Surprise, and then the kind of overall action of the Far Side of the World. It's kind of an amalgam of the three books. So if you're, and also the story that O'Brien's interested in telling really is almost sort of Robert Altman-esque in its, I'd say, in its lack of a kind of central structuring, plot-driven, if you get my meaning, right?
Yeah,
like
it's a bit like a Bildungsroman, right? Because you start with Jack Aubrey, Lucky Jack, who our hero, Russell Crowe. Yeah, exactly. As he's trying to be promoted, trying to make his career, but it's not just about that. And also, just very quickly, because I was mentioning the lyricism the whole time I was talking about that, I was procrastinating because I was looking for one specific phrase, which to me exemplifies like the whole quality of the writing. If you like it, you are going to love this book. If you don't like it, then you may find it difficult. It's a perfectly like workman-like sentence structurally, in that what it's conveying is, it gets you from one place to the other, but it's written like this. The Sophie came round fast and brought the wind onto her beam. Heeling over so that the silk-black water lapped at her port sills, she raced towards the nearest gunboat. It's so evocative. Like, silk-black water is just like, it's mwah. And it's all like this. There is not a single wasted sentence for the opportunity to, like, deploy something like that.
Yeah, well, it's the, I'd say it's one of the things Patrick O'Brian does so well is he spends this entire book trying to give you, the reader, a sense of what it would be like. Because there's, for whatever reason, well, we can talk about the reasons. In fact, it gives you this wonderful sense of what it's like to be on a brig rigged like a sloop with a quarterdeck at the very end of the 18th century, and then for the decades following. And I think one of the ways in which he does that, one of the reasons the style of the writing is so important, as you say, like about the sea, the description of the speed and feel of the vessel is because that is ultimately what he's trying to do. He's trying to, like, how a chase scene is good if it gives you, in a movie, if it gives you the sense of speed, right?
Yes.
O'Brien is doing that with quite evocative language, because if water in the Mediterranean, because this is all set in the Mediterranean, as Lucky Jack and his men go cruising, mostly.
Yeah.
You can imagine, I think, the silk dark waters as being going past you so quickly that they look much smoother than they are. Right? You're not.
Yeah.
This is not the sea described from some third person point of view, but he drops you into the ship and lets it sort of whir around you. And I mean, one of the thrills I get from reading it even is the feeling of progression as Jack takes over this ship that is, not in a terrific state.
Yeah, it is his first command, and this is the thing. He is sort of like at the start of his career. He has been a lieutenant. He is finally made master and commander of this sort of unimpressive, small, slow, fat ship with a kind of dodgy crew. Most of the best of whom have been abstracted by its last commander, because his commanding officer, Captain Hart, doesn't like him for reasons that we will get into. Yeah, because he's fucking his wife. He's fucking the shit out of this guy's wife. And so every time Captain Hart sees him, he's like, "That's the guy who's cucking me," and does not take it well.
Crazy.
Yes, but so Jack's career and what it means to be an officer of the Royal Navy in this period. This is something that really interests me in this book. His career progression is a sort of natural framework for the whole series, and you kind of you feel it along with him. But I think most especially here at this most junior level, because the structure of the Royal Navy at this time is such that you get your command, you're made master and commander, you are called captain as a courtesy. But it's not until you get an epaulet, which he gets drunk and then buys a sort of massive, mostly brass sort of false bullion epaulet. But it's not until you're made post-captain, which is the second novel in the series, that you are sort of captain by right rather than by courtesy. And after that, you promote by seniority. And after that, eventually, if you live long enough, you will be an admiral. Because it works purely on the Navy is at this time very, very bad at getting rid of officers off their books. And so you're still promoting, you're still sort of having time in service. But the time that you become post-captain, that sets your seniority forever. And so his obsession, as soon as he gets this command, which is already kind of late, is already kind of overdue because of his habit of things like fucking his commanding officers' wives, from that moment, he is like, how can I make this next jump to post-captain as quickly as possible to establish that seniority? And it grieves him every time someone else is promoted because he is going to be junior to them forever.
No matter what he does.
Absolutely. There's no meritocracy or no pretense of meritocracy about it. I want to talk about junior officering, and I want to talk about command, because I think this is one of the best books written about command and about being a naval officer specifically, but any kind of officer, manager even.
Don't read The Art of War if you're a business guy. Read this book.
Yes, yeah, because it won't necessarily give you advice beyond be daring and try stupid things, and 9 times out of 10 you'll lose, but try anyway. It's more about the kind of emotional resonances of it, and some of these are things that are now kind of cliche, like the absolute profound loneliness, and some of them are I think much more meaningful, much more sort of novel, if you like. But I do want to start with the loneliness, right? Because he exists in this position, he commands from the quarterdeck, which is the sort of raised deck on the aft end of the ship, towards the stern. And this is sacred ground, right? And we see a few times when he is thinking that he has this privilege of not being interrupted on it unless it is urgent, unless someone has real business with him. And he exists in this kind of boxed off area, giving commands. When he tries to relax, I mean, he can he gets hosted by the wardroom with the junior officers and the midshipmen and the warrant officers. And there's a really interesting description of how, since he's there, they are obliged to be deferential to him and laugh at his jokes and all of this. And the atmosphere that it fosters is one where he knows that he's intruding, they know that he's intruding, and it just kind of makes it worse,
At every step, if Jack tries to, and I think it's also worth talking about the characterization of Jack, not just as a good commander, but as a deeply flawed one, which, by the way, the movie does not do at all.
No. And nor the sort of job itself. And the bit that I really want to highlight is another one of my favorite bits in the novel. I'll just read this quote. So Jack is doing paperwork.
Which he fucking hates.
Yes, there is so much of it, and it is all sort of like somebody quietly embezzling from somebody else, and he has to like make people aware that he knows that they're embezzling. But he says, "There's the service for you from clue to earring, the Royal Navy, stock and fluke. You get into a fine flow of patriotic fervour. You are ready to plunge into the thick of battle, and you are asked to sign this sort of thing." He passed Stephen the carefully written sheet. "His Majesty's sloop Sophie at sea. My lord, I am to beg you will be pleased to order a court-martial to be held on Isaac Wilson, seaman, belonging to the sloop I have the honour to command, for having committed the unnatural crime of sodomy on a goat." And it's just, it's such a perfectly observed thing of, from the sublime to the ridiculous. It is pathetic in the tragic, in the, like, dramatic sense, right?
This at every state, whether it is sort of the entire sweep of the novel or individual engagements with different ships, Patrick O'Brian never allows anybody to get too enthusiastic about the service.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, the sort of the Hornblower novels are like, swashing, buckling, all of this, and very seldom interrupted by, we have caught one of the ratings fucking a goat in the goat house that we keep for goat's milk.
or even like the sweep of the story of Master and Commander is that Jack is, for all of his faults, of which there are many.
Yes.
He is short-sighted, impetuous. He's much more sort of, I think, personally greedy and less like a sort of philosopher warrior than he is in the movie.
He's sort of, in many ways, reminds me of, I think he's like the way that Boris Johnson imagines himself. Because one of the things about him is he is endlessly offensive. He says the most terrible things.
To some ladies who overhear him saying, "Oh, they'll be rampaging after having taken some prizes and gotten lots of money." Like, "Oh, they'll be rampaging around town with their pricks a yard long." Then turns to some shocked ladies,
way
and
too
says,
loud.
Yeah, and then says, "Don't worry, they'll probably get here last."
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the same thing with everyone, and he sort of, I'm trying to find the... Dylan was Irish, though you would never have thought so. Never to be seen drunk, almost never called anyone out, spoke like a Christian, the most gentlemanlike creature in the world, nothing of the Hector at all. Oh Christ, my dear fellow, my dear Maturin, who is also Irish, I do beg your pardon. I say these damned things. I regret it extremely. I say these damned things, Jack went on, musing as they drank their bottle, and I don't quite understand at the time, and though I see people looking black as hell and frowning, and my friends going psst, psst, and then I say to myself, you're brought by the lee again, Jack. Usually I make out what's amiss, given time, but by then it's too late. And the thing is, you want to forgive him it, because there is, as Stephen deduces of him, there is no malice in him. He is a perfect idiot. And he is just kind of cursed with this thing of saying the most offensive thing to anyone at any given moment, especially when it's most crucial, and then, like, legitimately not occurring to him that he has offended them. This is the guy who, like, I would let Jack Aubrey misgender me, is the thing. He would do this several 100,000 times a day.
But he would do it in, I guess, like a fun way and be really sorry when he realized that he'd done it.
Yeah, exactly. And offer you like a bottle of Madeira or something by way of apology.
Yeah.
And like, this is the thing. This is this kind of like untouchability that like people like Boris Johnson wish they had, think they have. And, because Jack Aubrey is a fictional creation, he can do this, and he can get away with this time after time, is to be like, well, he was Irish, but I never would have guessed because he barely had any lucky charms on him. And he's just like, what? And by the time you catch up with him and what he said, you're like, he's already sort of like red in the face and apologizing.
Yeah. All he really wants, he's just sort of idly mused. This goes back to, again, like, Jack Aubrey is, as you learn through the book, a supremely able captain and a supremely unable interactor with people. essentially.
Yes, and there is a thing as well that specifically in combat he changes. Stephen says that he like appears taller when he's sort of like bearing down on the enemy. He gets this kind of dangerous look in his eye. Yeah, absolutely. This is like really compelling to me, you know?
This is, I mean, look, I don't just want this to be the Patrick O'Brien fan hour, although it is, because it's a great book.
It kind of is.
It sort of is, which is fine.
I don't really have a bad thing to say about this novel, at least. Some of the others, go down, but like this one, no, I think I wouldn't change a word, you know?
But this is because I think like the way to understand Master and Commander and the entire Aubery-Maturin series is obviously not just Aubrey, but also Maturin. You know, because where Aubrey is unable to interact with the world on land, Maturin, anytime, it's very funny, anytime he attempts to do anything other than sit in the hold of a boat, will like walk off the side of it.
Yes, yeah. He is a landsman just by nature. Here is the bit about Jack in combat. Jack nodded, looking up and down at his two broadsides. He was a big man at any time, but now he seemed to be at least twice his usual size. His eyes were shining in an extraordinary manner, as blue as the sea, and a continuous smile showed a gleam across the lively scarlet of his face. "Well, Mr. Dillon," he cried, "this is a bit of luck, is it not?" Stephen, looking at them curiously, saw that the same extraordinary animation had seized upon James Dillon. Indeed, the whole crew was filled with a strange ebullience. Close by him, the Marines were checking the flints of their muskets, and one of them was polishing the buckle of his crossbelt, breathing on it and laughing happily between the carefully directed breaths. "Yes, sir," said James Dillon, "it could not have fallen more happily." This is they are about to like go in and sort of like receive broadsides from something, you know?
They fucking love it.
They love this shit, yeah.
But it's also again, like I think the sort of difference between this and sort of a more sort of swashbuckling novel is that they love it, but that's not necessarily a good thing.
Well, I mean, Maturin even actually says to himself in his diary, they are strangely immature for men of their age and their position, though indeed it is to be supposed that if they were not, they would not be here. The mature, the ponderate mind does not embark itself upon a man of war, is not to be found wandering about the face of the ocean in quest of violence. Which is a much more cogent sort of explanation of that than is in the film, I would say. The film gestures at this a few times, but...
The film gestures at it, but also because the film does not show Jack as a flawed character, basically.
Yes.
Right? The film shows Jack as a infinitely patient, infinitely insightful, you know, and weirdly, right, extremely socially adept. Right,
yes.
You're sort of put in mind of the scene where they're at the dinner table, and Jack diffuses a kind of festering argument between Stephen, who is about to make this point basically to the table, and everyone else by sort of telling a joke about weevils, right? Well, at the same time, signaling to Maturin, this is not Jack Aubrey of the books. This is basically the Jack Aubrey of the movie combines the best elements of Aubrey and Maturin of the books, and in fact becomes a less compelling character.
Well, this is the thing. That specific role of kind of diffusing tensions is specifically highlighted as like a skill of warrant officers, like the purser, right? Is like having the ability to make like conversation because they have spent their entire careers in very, very close quarters with a lot of like armed and dangerous men. They have this ability that the officers kind of sometimes don't, of like by necessity smoothing things over, of not saying the thing that they want to say, which is offensive. And in particular, like for captains, you see this again with the sort of like the sanctity of the quarterdeck and like the sort of like refusal to ever impose on them. This is both, you know, shown with other captains and described in Aubrey's sort of inner monologue as something that he is trying to guard against. Is it can make you sort of pompous and unthinking. And Aubrey is in some ways lucky that his unthinking is only limited to sort of bellowing something sexually offensive like women of society rather than something that gets him and his entire ship sunk.
But I found the quote about Stephen falling into the sea as a landsman. So This is when they are engaging in a ruse to dress one of their sort of junior officers up as a Danish officer to pretend to be a Danish ship to come in close to another ship to inspect the prisoners on it, to inspect people on it for some like Irish Republican dissidents, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is, and it also when we bring in the character of James Dillon, who is, I think, serves as well the crucial bridge between sort of Aubrey and the men, who's the Sophie's lieutenant.
Yeah. We'll talk about Dylan. Yeah. We'll talk about Ireland in the fullness of time.
So Stephen is getting off of the ship onto a cutter, and Jack is talking to him. He says, "Oh yes, this is a perfectly legitimate ruse de guerre. Often we amuse the enemy with false signals too. Anything but those of distress. Take great care of the paint now." At this point, Stephen fell straight into the sea. Into the hollow of the sea between the boat and the side of the sloop as they drew away from one another. He sank at once, rose as they came together, struck his head between the two, and sank again, bubbling. Most of the Sophie's people who could swim leapt into the water, Jack among them, and others ran with boat hooks, a dolphin striker, 2 small grapnels, an ugly barbed hook on the chain. But it was the brothers Sponge, so 2 Greek sponge fishermen, that found him 5 fathoms down and brought him up, his clothes blacker than usual, his face more white, and he was streaming with water, furiously indignant. It was no epoch-making event, but it was a useful one, since it provided the gun room being where the midshipmen and junior officers would make their mess, with a topic of conversation at a moment when very hard work was needed to maintain the appearance of a civilized community. But at the same time, right? Stephen is the one who, on land, is the only one who says to Jack, please stop fucking the captain's wife, the admiral's wife.
He's crucially, because they're based in Minorca, in Port Mahon, he's the only one who speaks either Catalan, French, or Spanish. Jack has like no facility for foreign language. He says, he speaks French, but it don't answer. And so he's much more socially adept in that way. We should talk about Stephen Maturin, because the way that they meet
is perfect for that. It is perfect for both their characters.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think, the MCU, stuff like this have ruined us on like origin stories, but this is a perfect little introduction to 2 characters, which is they share a passion for music, something which the movie does get. So Jack is ashore watching this. He's taking a concert at which the woman he is fucking, his commander's wife, is playing the harp, by the way. And he's like clapping along on his thigh. And this sort of large man, I am gratified by the way at which Jack is, all the time, he's depicted as fat. He's like muscular and fat at the same time.
He's beefy.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a bit in there which I also have highlighted. Whereas what Jack said, looking up from his plate, he had eaten 2 to 3 pounds of mutton. Again, it makes me feel strangely patriotic. But yeah, and this guy sitting next to him gives him a very rude look and says, "If you really must beat the measure, sir," in a whisper, "let me entreat you to do so in time and not half a beat ahead."
I love that movie Whiplash.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so he sits back in his chair, which he's described as like enveloping his chair, which I like a lot. And he's still he can't quite repress it. He's like tapping his foot, and Maturin elbows him in the ribs and shushes him. And this like very nearly leads to a duel. He takes his name for this. And then, by the time that he goes to meet him, he has been promoted and he is thoroughly drunk, has forgotten.
Too good of a mood.
Yeah, he's forgotten entirely about it. And they just end up bonding.
I don't think that, there's this, I hate to talk about news in Left Unread, right? But at the time of recording, there is this plan being bandied about to have some kind of like counter Andrew Tate government trained influencer program.
Yeah.
And I think they could just replace that with this book.
Honestly, though, for instance, we see that he comes back to his inn, his lodging, quite dejected, and we see the reason that he's dejected is he won't even try it on with the maid anymore. There's a line: "He did not respond with anything more than a mechanical jocosity and a vague dart at her bosom."
What, just so sad. He's just
lightly trying to like grab this woman, who, by the way, to be fair, is like coming on to him, but like he's, just kind of not interested. And then he gets this letter, and honestly, like, if the book hadn't already won me over so many times, this would be the place where it won me over. I think this is, for my money, the best depiction of receiving like life-changingly good news. If this is something that you have been fortunate enough to have happen to you, you will recognize it. Where he gets this letter naming him Master and Commander of the Sophie, and he sort of like he reads it, and then he reads it again, reads it a third time, throws it away, walks around, picks it up, reads it again in a kind of strange delirium, has far too many drinks, panics, thinks he's misread it, reads it again, and it's just like it's really, really good. And then, of course, I have a quote. The first thing he did, in point of fact, was to cross the road to the naval outfitters and pledge his now elastic credit to the extent of a noble, heavy, massive epaulet, the mark of his present rank. And then he goes out and sort of stumbles across Stephen.
I'm also actually have the same note. It says, as the door closed behind him, Jack saw the man in the black coat on the other side of the road near the coffee house. The evening flooded back into his mind as he hurried across, calling out, Mr. Maturin, why, there you are, sir. I owe you 1,000 apologies. I must have been a sad bore to you last night, and I hope you will forgive me. We sailors hear so little music and are so little used to genteel company that we grow carried away. I beg your pardon. Maturin says, well, why don't we have a cup of coffee? And to which Aubrey replies, you are very good, sir. I should like it of all things. To tell the truth, I was in such a hurry of spirits I forgot my breakfast. I've just been promoted.
Yeah, and so they breakfast together, and they find that they get along very well. And Maturin is he sort of is forced to admit this with some reluctance, a basically indigent doctor,
like extraordinarily well educated,
yes,
a very, very capable doctor,
yes,
and not just a well educated in the sort of as a surgeon, but a sort of a man of science, the kind that we don't generate.
Yeah, he is a physician. He is a natural philosopher, and he has been left kind of in the lurch because he has been like escorting a wealthy patient to Minorca. The patient has died and left him with like no money. So Jack kind of finds this out and says, there was a pause. Jack filled their glasses and observed, had I known you as a surgeon, sir, I do not think I could have resisted the temptation of pressing you. Surgeons are excellent fellows, said Stephen Maturin with a touch of acerbity. And where should we be without them? God forbid. And indeed, the skill and dispatch and dexterity with which Mr. Flory at the hospital here, Mr. Flory at the hospital here, everted Mr. Brown's epiterial bronchus would have amazed and delighted you. But I have not the honour of counting myself among them, sir. I am a physician.
The Mister was not lost on me.
Yes, yeah. Stephen is quite a bit of a snob, and I think this is the thing, right? The enduring fantasy of these books for an audience of nerds, right, is what if you had a big, bluff, stupid, dangerous, fun, caring friend who sort of like was willing to like induct you into this life of adventure in which what remains for you is to be very clever and not have to adapt yourself to it, but in a way that kind of allows you to be a kind of like useful expositor for the reader.
Well, this is, I mean, we go back to the passage towards the end of the book where Stephen just fully falls into the sea.
Yes,
he's not met with fun. They're very concerned with Stephen, partly because it's like, to have a surgeon on board, just a normal sort of sloop like this is quite something.
Yeah, he hacks off limbs, but like to have a doctor specifically. There's one bit that I really, really like. I don't remember if it's in this one or the next one post-Captain, but one of the things that that Stephen does after they get their first big prizes and they become a bit wealthier is he buys in huge amounts of like spices and things like this to mix into his drafts of medication, because sailors and he sort of like intuits this, like to know with their whole body that they are being physicked. You know, that the thing has to taste terrible and like sort of grip you around the throat because you know that that's making you better. So he's putting these things in quite unnecessarily, and that's I think one of the really perceptive things about Stephen Maturin.
This comes back to, without Stephen Maturin, this wouldn't be much of a book at all, because there needs to be someone who is looking at the sort of faint ridiculousness of Aubrey and the sailors.
Yes.
And I think then I think this is actually a good time to move on to probably the least ridiculous and most relatable of the seamen, who is James Dillon.
Yes, Lieutenant James Dillon, man going through it. So we...
So almost saved from awkwardness by being killed in action aboard the Cacafuego.
Yeah, because this is the thing, right? Like, because it mixes the sublime and the ridiculous, there is a lot of ridiculousness, and I think it would potentially slip into it. You would have the, like, you know, fucking goats, things of this nature. And then running into it is, we have your new sort of, like, executive officer, your new second in command. What's his name? James Dillon. Immediately... Stephen Maturin, like, all the blood drains out of his face. And, you know, Dillon coming aboard, recognizing him just the same. And throughout the rest of the novel, Dillon is sort of tormented. And the thing that torments these two men, the thing that unites them and divides them, is Ireland, is being Irish. Because both are survivors of the United Irishmen, the Society of United Irishmen. And the sort of rebellion against British authority in Ireland. And this comes out very slowly. And they are very careful about this. And I think one of the things that I like about this is the unspoken delicacy of these conversations. Because, you know, you're told a few times exactly how small a sloop is, or a brig for that matter, and how there is basically no such thing as a private conversation. And so there are a few times when these men find themselves alone together, and when they finally do, and when they can actually sit down and have a drink together, then, you know, they talk about this. And so Dillon is from a much more privileged background, and he kind of denies it. There's a, you know, he says sort of, I'm not from much. It's like 4/5 bog and 1/5 mountain. And Stephen just quite coolly says, I have ridden across your land.
Because again, this is one of the reasons why, sort of, because Aubrey and Maturin are both in their own way enthusiastic characters. Mm-hmm. You know, they are. Aubrey is enthusiastic for, you know, king and country and battle and all this, and Maturin is enthusiastic for learning and sort of fineness and sort of advancement, if not socially. Then he is, when he sort of meets and when they're taken prisoner aboard a French ship briefly, you know, he's all too excited to talk to their commanding officer about his theories of animal life and so on and so on.
Their doctor,
James Dillon is the only unenthusiastic character, I think, only unenthusiastic main character in the entire book. And again, it serves as an important audience substitute.
Yeah. Well, he was a revolutionary, but like a curiously like aristocratic liberal one. What he wanted, what he was like in the United Irishmen for, was an Irish Parliament under the British Crown. Whereas Stephen, you get the sense, was a lot more radical. And because the United Irishmen and Ireland generally were like continually infiltrated and sabotaged and suborned by, like, suborned isn't the word I mean, but like run through with like British informers. He sort of like, out of loyalty, despite having been quite disillusioned, he has to like go to Fitzgerald and sort of like to say, call off the rebellion. You know, you had discovered this is going to end horribly. And he says, that afternoon I spent more spirit than ever I spent in my life. Even then, I no longer cared for any cause or any theory of government on earth. I would not have lifted a finger for any nation's independence, fancied or real, and yet I had to reason with as much ardour as though I were filled with the same enthusiasm as in the first days of the Revolution, when we were all overflowing with virtue and love. Because I had to convince him that his plans were disastrously foolish, that they were known to the castle, and that he was surrounded by traitors and informers. And so Dillon, who is kind of like horrified and also disillusioned in his own way, but in a sort of much more forceful way, says, "And would you not lift a finger even for the moderate aims?" And this is the bit where we get like unvarnished, like right to the core of Maturin. "I would not. With the revolution in France gone to pure loss, I was already chilled beyond expression. And now with what I saw in 98 on both sides, the wicked folly and the wicked brute cruelty, I have had such a sickening of men and masses and of causes that I would not cross this room to reform Parliament or to prevent the Union or to bring about the millennium. I speak only for myself, it is my own truth alone, but man as part of a movement or a crowd is indifferent to me. He is inhuman, and I have nothing to do with nations or nationalism. The only feelings I have for what they are for men as individuals. My loyalties, such as they may be, are to private persons alone." Which is just an incredible, like, show-stopping piece of characterization to be like, this, sort of man of the Enlightenment has been so sort of like quietly disillusioned that he is apolitical now. The hard way is I mean, the way he describes the rising, right? The rising of the United Irishmen is Dylan asks him, not having known, having come to it slightly later, was it terrible? Terrible. I cannot by any possible energy of words express to you the blundering, the delay, the murderous confusion, and the stupidity of it all. It accomplished nothing. It delayed independence for 100 years. It sowed hatred and violence. It spawned out a vile race of informers and things like Major Sir. And, incidentally, it made us the prey of any chance blackmailing informer. And so this is just what happens. Dylan, sort of having had this conversation, having ended up worse, is then haunted by, this attempt at rebellion. And when the Sophie is ordered to find these two, disguised rebel leaders on a ship, he finds them and is blackmailed by them. One of them, who is a priest.
Yeah. We don't miss, of course, that it's that the blackmailer is a priest.
Yeah, a Jesuit priest, like, threatens to expose him as having been a rebel himself unless he lets them go. And he gets off the ship, and sort of like the implication is that, he was going to let them go anyway, but having betrayed his oath, not by his choice, has kind of ruined him. And as such, there's a kind of like moral hazard, a moral compromise here. And so for the rest of his life in the book, he is just sort of like off,
And this is something that Maturin is able to perceive, and Jack is only able to perceive the outlines of.
Yes, yeah, because he doesn't know.
Hey, so something's weird with Dylan. Anyway, time to go back to my bloviating.
Something's weird with this Irish guy. He didn't laugh at any of my Pope jokes. I mean, the other thing is we see in Stephen's diary that he writes that he has this kind of theory of mind, or theory of age rather, that like at a certain point you kind of some trauma happens to you that like robs you of your enjoyment of life, and it fixes you into becoming a character in the way that the senior officers we've seen are. You become kind of more two-dimensional because you don't have that like fullness of experience anymore, because it has been like very harshly limited by like prior experience. And it's, heavily implied that for Stephen this is the rising, right? But he sees this happen to Dylan, and crucially he worries about this happening to Jack, because it hasn't yet. He's still like ebullient, he's still fulsome, he's still capable of changing his nature in some ways, and that becoming fixed and that becoming sort of bitter and rigid is something that I think really like pursues Maturin.
And I think this is why the most interesting and most sort of like a normal book, if you like, part of Master and Commander is the saga of James Dillon and in his relationship with the service. I mean, again, like, just to take a longer step back, like, it's not lost on you that this guy who was in the United Irishmen, in fact, both of these guys who are sort of associated with the United Irishmen are now in the English Navy.
Yeah, I mean, the first hint that you get of this, by the way, is Stephen is like up one of the masts being shown for the reader and also for himself, like what the different parts of the ship are. And he has like a masthead explained to him. He thinks very quietly to himself, Castlereagh hanging at the one masthead and Fitzgibbon at the other, thought Stephen, but with only the weariest gleam of spirit, which are opposing sides of the rebellion. So he's just like, fucking hang all of them.
Yeah, but I think one of the other things that I think is a theme that comes up again and again is that the Navy is kind of a place where you sort of wash up. If you have lost everything else on land, then the best place for you is just to kind of land in the Navy. Yes. And this is both high and low, right?
Yes.
This is Aubrey, who is completely and utterly fucking useless on land. But this is also Maturin, who is a penniless physician. This is also, Dylan, a sort of rebel without a cause, so to speak. But additionally, this is even some of the sort of normal ratings. Right. These are also people who do not have a place.
Yes,
in
absolutely.
In the rest of the
whether
world,
because they've been like pressed, or whether they're like from quotas, or they've just picked them up off other ships,
or they were this fellow Cheslin. Cheslin, who he let slip that his old job back on land was to be a sin eater.
Yes,
someone whose job basically is if someone died. It says when a man died, Cheslin would be sent for. There would be a piece of bread on the dead man's breast, and he would eat it, taking the sins upon himself. Then they would put a silver piece into his hand and throw him out of the house, spitting on him and throwing stones as he ran away.
Yeah, and sort of like, of course, the crew. What's the word?
They call him a Jonah.
Well, yeah, the crew ostracize him to the point that he can't eat in the mess with them, and so he is starving to death for want of food. It's Stephen who notices this and pieces this together, and the way in which he sort of saves his life, because this offends him as a liberal, is to reconstruct his identity. But he makes him his mate, the surgeon's mate, effectively.
His loblolly boy.
Yeah, go wash all the blood off the floor, and this kind of works. He like takes him under his protection because they're so fond of Stephen. It sort of it saves his life. Incidentally, by the way, when I mentioned the Pope jokes, I was not exaggerating. I have a quote here. This is Jack speaking, of course. I said, more of these damned Irish papists. At this rate, half the starboard watch will be made up of them, and we shall not be able to get by for beads. Meaning it pleasantly, But then I noticed a damned frigid kind of a chill, and I said to myself, why, Jack, you damned fool, Dylan is from Ireland, and he takes it as a national reflection. Whereas I had not meant anything so illiberal as a national reflection, of course, only that I hated papists. So I tried to put it right with a few well-turned flings against the Pope.
What I have is sort of when he's brought everyone back round again, and they are when they've sort of sunk a privateer off of North Africa. Jack says, this is I think one of the more famous lines of the book. "Come," cried Jack with a sudden inspiration, "let us drink to the renewed success of Irish arms and confusion to the Pope."
Yeah, perfect incoherence, because it doesn't matter to him. Like the fact that he is a Tory by like politics and patronage and a little bit by instinct, but for the most part, in the same way as like Sherlock Holmes not knowing whether or not the Earth revolves around the sun, he doesn't need to know anything about Ireland because it doesn't have much bearing to him, and every time that it does, he is saved from it by Stephen. This is one of his flaws as a commander, but he is like helpfully augmented it by becoming besties with a guy who has enough knowledge to stop him singing offensive songs in front of his crew.
Anyway, so just seeing that we're sort of coming round to the end.
We've talked not at all about any of the naval aspect of the actual strategic aspect, but it doesn't matter is the thing. Just read the book. It's really fucking good.
Yeah, this is like one of I've given a few sort of strong read the book conclusions when we've had some of these episodes. This is probably the strongest read the book I'm going to give.
Yes,
read the book.
Read the book as read it as a character study. Read it as a study of command specifically and of duty. I do note the line, his duty was clear enough, the unwelcome choice as usual. And when Stephen sort of confronts him about a choice he has made in the course of this, he says, upon your own head be it then. And he says, certainly. And that kind of resignation and loneliness and determination is very, very compelling to me.
And I think also read it just to get a sense of, I think, almost the social history of the Navy. I mean, one of the reasons I really like the way that Patrick Wyman, friend of the show, tells history is that he uses characters and stories to give, not because there might have been a herdsman in Mohenjo-Daro who walked a certain path a certain way and saw a certain thing, but because it allows you to empathize with him.
Yes, absolutely.
If you can have confidence that the history is right, then the artistic liberties taken by the author, I mean, many of the naval engagements that sort of Aubrey commands are based on real naval engagements that have happened.
Yeah,
right?
HMS Speedy and Cochrane.
Yeah, the HMS Good Ship.
Yeah, but this is the thing. Like, something occurs to me which I saw said of the book now series Shogun, which we should really do. We should do some of the James Clavell like white boy fantasies.
I loved those when I was young. I thought I could become Japanese.
We'll get into that. That's its own episode. But somebody said the thing about this, HBO series Shogun, it's got great world building. Which is funny because it's Japan, right? What you're doing there is not world building, that is research. But in the same way that, like, if you had fictionalized this, like, this would be fantastic world building. What this is world understanding. And it's deployed very, very effectively, both in the James Clavell white boy fantasies, but also here. And I heartily endorse this.
White boy arrives in Japan and orders a samurai charge in perfect Japanese, shocks Daimyo.
Yeah. White boy shocks brig-rigged sloop by ordering broadside in perfect anti-Catholic bigotry.
All right. This has been your $10 Left on Red. We hope you enjoyed it, everybody. And we will see you on the other side.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.